Each year we work very hard at finding a commencement speaker who will understand the journey that our students and our families have traveled to get to this day. For if the speaker does not know our students or our school, his or her message would undoubtedly fall on deaf ears. We have a rich history of fantastic speakers, and I am certain today we'll top them all. You see, Rick Lavoie is one of us. He and his wife Janet started their teaching careers right here on this very campus in the 1970s. While the buildings may be a bit different and the sophistication and maturity of Eagle Hill further excelled, the education of values and philosophy that Rick learned on these hallowed grounds still to this day serve as the foundation of his international reputation and, dare I say, stardom. I will tell you that it is a bit humbling to speak at a national conference when Rick is the keynote. He's like the Pied Piper. And God forbid that you're speaking at the same time as Rick. You might as well bring a mirror because you're going to be alone. I'll let you read his official bio that's on the back of the program that details all of his national television appearances, books written, keynote addresses, and of course his groundbreaking videos that have literally served as the training tools for tens of millions of people the globe around. But those things don't define Rick. Rick is profoundly different, and I think better, than all of the educational gurus that I know. He gets kids at their very core, and he combines that with a remarkable ability to open the collective eyes of teachers and parents to the multiplicity of learning. Rick is a genius. He is also a colleague and friend. Please join me in welcoming Rick Lavoie.
Thank you, Peter. I better be good, huh? Dr. McDonald, Board of Trustees, administration, faculty, staff, parents, guests, students, and the class of 2013. As Peter said in his kind introduction, I've been doing public speaking for about 40 years now. And I'm at the point in my career where I work with young people who want to become speakers, and I coach them. And one of the things I teach them is that the audience doesn't care about the speaker. That the audience is they come to an event to be inspired or to get some information or some sort of inspiration and insight. And if you're the speaker and you've had a bad day and your car wouldn't start, or you missed the plane, or they lost your luggage, or you've had a great day and you've just got a new dog, or your kid aced the SATs, the audience doesn't care about that. Never begin a speech by talking about yourself. And I'd like to break that rule because I need to tell you, I am so delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a year. This is where it all started for us. Janet and I have worked together with kids who struggle for 40 years now, and it all began right here. Our first 3 years of teaching were here. Our firstborn son, this was his first home. For me, Norma Shields is not a library. She's a woman who taught me everything I know about remedial education. And Charles McDonald is not a dusty portrait in the teacher's lounge. He was a giant of a man who gave me my first job. I was the first person to recognize that maybe I had some potential in this field. It was, as Peter said, it was a different school then, folks, a very different school. They were struggles. Those were the early years of the school, and quite often we got our paychecks we're supposed to get our paychecks on Wednesday. We'd be told we get them on Friday. We get them on a Friday with a note that says, don't cash until Monday. And that was a regular occurrence in 1972. We didn't have enough of anything. One of my lasting memories, we didn't have enough chairs. And on the blackboard in my room, I had a schedule of who had to take their chairs to the next class, so we had enough chairs. My lasting memory is seeing our kids with a book bag on one shoulder and a chair in another, walking through the snow to the next class. We had one maintenance man and one assistant maintenance man. Who did the painting? Who did the plowing? Who did the shoveling? The teaching staff, the faculty, were the ones that painted the buildings every year. We worked 15-hour days. And that was our schedule, 15-hour days. And we worked 1 weekend out of 3, which meant that if you had a weekend, you worked 12, 15-hour days in a row. And we loved it. And we loved it. The first year I worked here, we didn't do it for the money. The first year I worked here, my father-in-law did our taxes, and he said, "How many hours a day do you work?" And I said, 15. He said, "Do you know you're eligible for food stamps?" But we loved it. We made lifelong friends here. I learned pretty much everything I know in the early years about special education and how to deal with kids who struggle. One of the primary things I learned is the 2 magic words in this field are support and challenge. Your job is to constantly challenge the students to be the best they can be, but give them the support they need to meet that challenge. And if you're challenging them but not supporting them, that's not education. And if you're just supporting them and not challenging them, that's not education. It's that balance. I learned some wonderful lessons here. I learned that it's the small things you do for kids that make a difference. It was right down in the Little Red Schoolhouse. It's no longer with us. I learned one of the most important lessons I ever learned about kids who struggle. I had this little boy in my class, his name was Jordy, 8 years old. This little guy was fighting the battle on several fronts. He had learning problems, he had reading problems, he had language problems, he had physical problems, he had motoric problems and social emotional problems. He was fighting the battle on several fronts, but he was a sweet, wonderful little guy. And I had him in a one-to-one tutorial. It was my job to teach him how to read, write, and spell. And I had 40 minutes a day to do that. And the way I structured my classes, he used to come into my class and I'd give him a notebook and he'd write down something that happened to him the day before. Or that day, something important had happened to him that day, and he'd give it to me and I'd take it back to my room in the dormitory and I'd read it, make a comment on it, bring it back, even give it to him the next day. He'd write another comment, something that happened to him that day. He was keeping like a diary, a journal through the year. And he came running into my classroom one day. "Mr. Lavoie, give me my notebook, something great happened yesterday. I've got to write it down." And I gave him the notebook and he wrote something down. And he gave it back to me. I didn't read it. I put it in my briefcase. And that night when I was preparing my lessons, I opened up my briefcase, I opened up his notebook, I read what he wrote, I cut it out, I framed it, and it's hung in my office for 40 years. This is what Jordy wrote. "Yesterday was a really great day. I almost caught a ball." The ball came to him at recess. He didn't make a total fool of himself. He almost caught it, and that made his day. And that's what convinced me it's the small things. It's the small little acts of kindness you show to kids who struggle, and that makes all the difference. And the most important lesson I learned here, after I left Eagle Hill, I ran residential schools for another 28 years, and I learned the most important lesson on this campus. And that is the success of a residential school, particularly a school for kids who struggle, is to have a good relationship with the parents. And the way you have a good relationship with the parents is you make an disagreement with the parents. If you promise to believe only half of what the kids tell you happened at school, we'll believe only half of what they tell us happens at home. Learned that on this campus. So folks, it is good to be home. It is good to be home. And particularly on such a special day, graduation day, very emotional day. It's always an emotional day. In fact, I hope I don't embarrass PJ, but when I went into his office today, he was sitting at his desk crying. And I said, PJ, are you crying about some of the seniors that are leaving? He said, "No, I'm crying about some of the juniors who are coming back." My job as a graduation speaker is to make a greeting on behalf of the school and to give some advice. And this greeting is very traditional the way it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to begin with the Board of Trustees. But with their kind permission, and I've met some of them today, I don't think they'll mind this at all, I'm going to change the order a little bit. Because every time I speak at an event like this, particularly at a special school like Eagle Hill, I'm reminded of something that happened to Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower, as you remember, of course, was our president during the 1950s, and prior to that, he was head of Allied forces during World War II in Europe. But what a lot of people forget is in the intervening period between his time as a general and his time as our president, he served as the president of Columbia University in New York. And the first time he met with the assembled staff and faculty of Columbia, you can picture the same 1,500 faculty and staff in Columbia to meet the university president for the first time. And Eisenhower got up to the microphone and he said, "Aren't you lucky to be teaching at Columbia University? Aren't you fortunate to be working at Columbia University? Aren't you blessed to be working at Columbia University. And this elderly professor in the back of the room, who obviously had tenure, stood up and he said, with all due respect, sir, we don't work at Columbia University. We don't teach at Columbia University. We are Columbia University. And that's the way it is in a school. These folks, they are the school. The faculty and staff. The faculty and staff at Eagle Hill School. Beautiful facilities, wonderful leadership team, but it's these folks who walk the halls every day that make a difference. Particularly this year. Because in September, when you dropped your seniors off, and the seniors and the faculty and staff met here, they had no idea that within 6 weeks, there would be such an immeasurable loss. And they had no idea of the losses that they would suffer this year. And these people to my left realized that it wasn't just their job to help these kids understand math and science and history, but had to help them understand some of life's toughest lessons, that bad things do happen to good people. And these people carried your kid through it. And I literally take off my hat to them. Thank you. I do want to recognize the Board of Trustees. It is absolutely overwhelming, as someone who hasn't been on this campus in decades, to see what you've done with this campus is absolutely overwhelming. It truly is a miracle, truly a miracle. And it's because of the vision of your Board of Directors. It's been said that a vision without a plan is useless, and a plan without a vision is worth even less. These folks have a vision and a plan. And as they walk this campus, they're able not only to see what the campus is, but what it will be someday. And everyone, all of us who love Eagle Hill, owe them a great debt of gratitude. I want to also thank and acknowledge a group of folks who don't get acknowledged usually at graduation. Raise your hand if you're an aunt, or an uncle, or a cousin, or a friend, or a neighbor of one of the graduates. You know what? You're responsible for today too. I've been doing some work with organization in Pasadena, and what they've done is they've looked, for years in our field, we looked at adults with learning problems that hadn't made it, that failed, to see what they did wrong. This group in Pasadena said, no, let's take a look at a group of adults who have made it, adults with learning problems who have made it, and see what they do right. And then teach those skills to the struggling students. And the number one thing that they found for an adult who has learning struggles, the number one thing that they said contributed to their success is they had a support system. They had a group of cheerleaders. They had people who believed in them. They had people who had more faith in them than they had in themselves. So if you're an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a brother or sister or a friend of a graduate, you have every bit as much right to be here as everybody and anybody else, and maybe more. So congratulations to you. Second part of my job is to get some advice, and let me do that. And I'm certainly going to give some advice to the students, but let me, if I could, give some advice to the parents as well. We're halfway between Mother's Day and Father's Day, and I thought it would be good to give some advice to the parents. It's tough being a parent today. It's tougher than it's ever been before. I was speaking in North Carolina not too long ago and flying back into Logan Airport in Boston where we live. And you know, you're sitting in the back of the plane, you've paid for 18 inches of space, it's like your own little world, you know. The gentleman next to you, if you're having a heart attack, you don't even notice it, just gonna sit there protecting your space. We got about halfway home, we're flying over Washington, D.C. someplace, and I remembered I had a lecture to deliver that evening at Boston College, and I hadn't finished putting it together. So I reached into my briefcase and took out some educational journals and dropped the tray table down in front of me and started taking some notes in these journals. And it was a middle-aged gentleman sitting right to my left, and he kind of leaned over into my space and saw what I was doing, and he said, excuse me, he said, are you in education? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you have any children of your own? And I said, yes, I do. We have 3. And with that, it was very strange. It was almost mystical. His eyes kind of glazed over, and he looked out the window of the plane and shook his head and said, half out loud and half to himself, I couldn't have tell if he was talking to me. He said, God, I wish I had 3 kids. I'd give anything to have 3 kids. And I said, don't you have any children, sir? He said, yes, I have 6. You know. not easy. It's not easy. I was traveling one time down south, and I'm driving on a highway, and this car passes me with a bumper sticker in the back that says, "Children are God's greatest blessing." I said, "Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice?" About 10 minutes later, another car came by, and the bumper sticker said, "Being a parent is like getting pecked to death by a duck." And both of those things are true. But you parents of kids who have struggled, you parents who have spent time on what I call the waterbed. The workshop I do for parents of kids who struggle is a thing called On the Waterbed, the special needs child at home in the classroom. And the analogy I draw is that a family of 5 is like 5 people lying side by side on a waterbed. Whenever one person moves, everyone feels the ripple. So if you've got a child who's struggling, the brothers, the sisters, the aunts and uncles, everybody else feels the impact of it. And many times you make that journey alone. Because as hard as we've tried to educate the American educational public, there are so many teachers who just don't get it. Aren't you lucky you found people who did? You've been doing this as long as I have. You think you've heard everything. You think you've heard everything. And then once in a while you hear something that knocks you on your tail. And I was speaking in Kansas beginning of last year, and I ran into this young mom, little boy with Tourette syndrome, 6 years old. Now that family's got a journey. They got a very difficult journey ahead of them, and she told me this story. Listen to this. The child had been in first grade 5 days. It was Friday at the end of his first week of school. And her phone rang at home about 8 o'clock in the evening. The mother answered the phone, and the woman on the other end said, "Hello, Mrs. Jones. This is Miss Smith. I'm your son's first grade teacher, and we need to talk." And the mother said, "Well, thank you for calling. What can I do for you?" And the teacher said, "We had a speaker come through this summer that said whenever you call a parent on the phone, you should always begin the conversation by saying something kind or positive about the child." But frankly, I can't think of a single kind or positive thing to say. You know what the mother said? "Call me back when you can," and hung up the phone. That moment in time where you say the right thing. But you know, Janet and I celebrated our 40th anniversary last year, and we made a long, hoped-for trip to Amsterdam. And we had a chance to go visit the Anne Frank Museum. And it really blew me away. I taught the Diary of Anne Frank on this campus to kids. And I read it when I was a kid. And to actually be there was amazing. But of all the things I saw, the thing I remembered the most that has just not been able to shake is as you leave the museum, there's a video loop of Otto Frank, Anne's dad. And he made the video a few years before he died in 1985. And he talks to parents. And he said something that was so chilling, I haven't been able to shake it. Here's what he said. He said, "I love my daughter Anne. And we were as close as you can be. Literally. They spent the last 3 years of their life in a 3-room apartment without ever being able to leave." He said, "We talked day and night. She was my friend. I knew her. I loved her. And I understood her." And then I found her diaries. And I realized I never knew her at all. I never knew she had those conflicts. I never knew she had those thoughts. I never knew she had those pressures on her. And he looks directly at the camera and he says, "To mothers and fathers, you will never truly know your children." Wow. Whoa. Pretty heavy. Pretty heavy. But it is tough to know our kids. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said shortly before she died, listen to this, "We are the first generation, our generation, are the first generation that cannot say this to their parents. Every other generation in the history of mankind has been able to say to their kids, 'I was a kid once, I know what it's like. I can guide you through your childhood.' Not for us. Because being a kid today is very different than it was when we were kids. Very, very different. They were raised in a very different world. They were 5 years old when our country was attacked. They lived in a very, very different world than we did. And so it's difficult sometimes to understand our kids because they are from a different generation. There's an organization called Beloit College, and there was a president of the college who realized a number of years ago that the adults in the college, the professors, were having a difficult time relating to the 20-year-old college students because the students today were raised in such a different world than we were raised in. And so we put together a list And let me borrow it if I could, part of the list. Let me tell you something about the Eagle Hill School class of 2013 and see how different they were than the way we grew up and our experience as children. Their entire life there has been an internet. There has been an internet from the day they were born. I keep telling teachers, stop referring to the internet as technology. To the kids, it's the internet. It's like our parents referring to television as technology. It's just always been there. They've never seen a television set with a dial on it. They've never lived in a world where Russia was a communist country. They have never lived in a world where Russia was communist. They have never seen a Woolworths. Their entire life, the major leagues have been divided into 3 divisions with a wild card. Their entire lives, I still haven't accepted it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has always been on the Supreme Court. Michael Landon has always been dead. They've never seen a card catalog. State abbreviations have always been 2 letters. They were never taught cursive. Leno and Letterman have always been on late night television their whole lives. There's never been a Czechoslovakia. They asked a group of high school seniors to identify LBJ. 60% of the kids said LeBron James. And they asked these kids to identify Arnold Palmer. And the overwhelming response was, it's a drink that's half lemonade and half iced tea. No idea there was a guy who played golf once named Arnold Palmer. And it's not that they're not well read, they're the best read generation there's ever been, but they come from a different world. Ferris Bueller could be their father. So there is this gulf. There is this difference between parents and kids. And as your children are going into college, that gulf can get wider. So how do we keep it from getting wider? Quite simply, learn from your children. They have much to teach you. Learn from your children. And as I said, coming here has been a very emotional experience for us, and it got me thinking about our son who was born on this campus. This was his first home. He's now 38 years old, and one of the finest men that I know. But it got me thinking about him, and let me tell you a story. When he was first born, shortly after we left here, my life's goal was to get his first words to be Mama. I wanted him to say Mama. And Janet wanted his first words to be Daddy. So what I would do when she didn't know it is I'd sneak him away and we'd have what I called our mama drills. And we'd say, Mama, Mama, Mama. And every night I'd volunteer to put him to bed. I'll put him to bed. Don't worry. I'll put Christian to bed. And I'd put him to bed and she'd be downstairs and Mama, 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 Mama. And it just wasn't happening. And one night I put him to bed and we did our mama drill for 10 minutes and I thought it's just not working and I went to leave the room and I said, I'm going to try one more time. And I bent into his crib and I said, Mama. And he looked up at me and he said, Mama. And this look came over his face. What the hell just happened here? This look said, I'm not sure who you are. You're not around as much as that redhead lady. But I really like what just happened here, because you could do something and I couldn't. And now I can do it too. You taught me something. I like this. Let's do more of it. And I taught him. I became his teacher. I taught him what it was like to be a boy and hopefully what it's like to be a man. But that all changed his freshman year in high school. And I'll tell you what happened. Christian started coming home from school and bragging about this new English teacher that he had. This male English teacher. Dad, he's so smart. Oh, Dad, he's written poetry. Oh, Dad, he's done Shakespeare in college. Oh, Dad, he's really smart. He was on a play on Broadway one time. Oh, Dad, he's great. I was so blown away. I'm the guy. No other guy. I'm the guy. And I was so incredibly inappropriate. I don't want to hear about him anymore. We'd sit at the table, I'd say, we can't talk about school. We were teachers, they were students. We couldn't talk about school. I said, look, I don't want to hear about this guy anymore. I handled it so inappropriately. But my nose was really out of joint. And so finally one day I got tired of it and I said, okay, you think this guy is so smart? You think he's some superhero? Let me give you a question. This is a question I said that's bothered me for 20 years. I've never been able to figure it out. I do a lot of work with universities. I sat down with university professors and asked them this question, and nobody's been able to come up with the answer. See if you're a smart guy, come up with this. And he said, what is it? I said, well, one of my favorite songs is a song called Birmingham Sunday. It's written and performed by Joan Baez, and it's about the tragic Birmingham church bombing where 5 children were killed on a Sunday in 1965. And there's a line in the song I never understood. And the line is this: and the falcon of death was a preacher they knew. And I said, I don't know what that means, the falcon of death. I mean, he wasn't complicit in the murders. What does a falcon of death mean? Ask your smart aleck teacher what that means. See if he knows. So Christian went upstairs to his room, and he came down about 10 minutes later. He said, Dad, I was thinking about that, and I think I might have come up with something. I said, what's that? He said, well, in old England, the king used to bring his friends to hunting parties, and they'd have hunting parties, and they'd go into the middle of the woods with their weapons to hunt small birds. And they trained falcons to fly in circles around the woods. Now, the falcons were just doing what they were trained to do, just to fly in circles. But what they didn't know is they were actually gathering the small birds together so the king and his hunting party could kill them. Maybe what she meant was that the minister didn't realize this, but when he called these little girls together for Sunday school, he was bringing them to their death. And I looked at him and I said, what the hell just happened here? And from that moment and to this moment, we exchanged the student and teacher roles. Half the time when I call him, I'm asking for advice. Half the time he calls me, he's asking me for my advice. Listen to your kids. Don't make fun of their music. Sit down and listen to it with them. Have them teach you about that. And then maybe they'll listen to a little bit of your Creedence or Dylan. Don't ridicule their video games. Ask them how to play them. Play a role in their lives. Learn from them because they have much to teach us. My advice to the students, I've lived my life by 7 basic rules. You leave it after these 7 basic rules, you're going to do okay. You ready? 1, compliment 3 people a day. Give compliments to 3 people a day. Number 2, never shop for groceries when you're hungry. Number 3, watch the sunrise at least once a year. Number 4, never tell anyone they look tired. Number 5, pat your dog every time you walk by him. Number 6, and this is very important going off to college, give yourself a nickname before someone else does. But most importantly, always have a friend who owns a truck. You know, I met briefly with the seniors before we came over here. I don't happen to be Jewish. That's not my faith. But I have, my teaching philosophy, for whatever reason, matches very closely with the Jewish philosophy. And 20% of my speeches that I give are to Jewish organizations. Many times I'm the first non-Jew that they've asked to speak at their organizations. And I have fallen under the spell of these rabbis. Yeah, one time I spoke to 400 rabbis. Do you know what it's like to be in a room with 400 people and you know you're the dumbest guy in the room? They're just so brilliant and so scholarly, and it's just wonderful. And I was talking to a rabbi one time, and I said, why are the Jewish faith, why are the Jewish people so embraced in education? Why do they care so much about education? And he answered me like this. You know what he said? Because it's portable. Because you take it with you everywhere you go. They can take, there are people who have been driven out of their lands for decades, for centuries, but they can take their money, they can take their coins, they can take their gold, but they cannot take their education. Once you've got it, it's yours. And that's what you seniors need to remember, is there's no magic here in Old Petersham Road. The things you learned here are yours. They're not going to leave you once you leave here. You're going to take them to the colleges, wherever colleges go. But you're always going to have to work a little bit harder than everybody else. That's the reality. You always got to give that little bit extra that you didn't know you had. Let me have your parents demonstrate this for you. Everybody, if you would, please raise your hand as high as you can. Raise your hand as high as you can. Okay, now raise it higher. See? You see? That little bit of extra that you didn't realize you had. And for the rest of your lives, you're going to have to work just a little bit harder. And if I could, in closing, for the class of 2013, these have been great years of gains and successes and years of great losses. There were some people who cheered you on during the race and they didn't make it to the finish line. Some of you had parents, grandparents, relatives, friends, and a school administrator who were your biggest cheerleaders, but they didn't make it to the finish line. They're not with you here today. What would they say to you if they were here? What would they say to you if they were here with you today? Well, I've thought a lot about that, and I came up with an answer. And the answer is from The House on Pooh Corner, starring Winnie the Pooh. Now, you're sitting there thinking, oh, children's literature. Let me teach you a life lesson here. Children's literature is filled with some of the greatest wisdom that's ever been written. Because you see, people who write children's stories have to understand this. Two things. First of all, kids can't read. And secondly, they don't have any money. So kids don't buy children's books. Adults buy children's books. So when you write a children's book, you've got to write a story that's exciting and wonderful for the kids, but also interesting and insightful enough for the parents to be willing to buy the book and read it repeatedly to the kid. And there's great wisdom in children's literature. In my office, I've got shelves of scholarly journals and books lining the shelves, but I also have Make Room for Ducklings and Dr. Seuss. And When the Sidewalk Ends, because there's great wisdom there. What message, those who aren't with us today, what message would they leave? It again is from Winnie the Pooh. House on Pooh Corner was written 80 years ago by a gentleman named A.A. Milne. He was a war hero and a professor. And he wrote stories about a boy named Christopher Robin. And Christopher Robin spent all of his time in the woods. He loved his friends, his animal friends in the woods. And they loved him. And he was very protective of them. And he took care of them. And he gave them guidance. But he realized that there was going to be a time that he was going to have to leave. And he was worried about how his friends would be able to handle that. And he was particularly worried about Pooh Bear, because Pooh Bear was greatly attached to him. And he sat down in a tree one day with Pooh Bear and he said, Pooh Bear, what will ever happen if there's a tomorrow where we're apart? And Pooh Bear said, oh, we'll be fine if we're apart as long as we're together. And he said, no, what if there's a day where we're not together? And Pooh Bear said, oh, that can't happen. I'd be lost without you. I wouldn't know which way to turn. What would I do when I'm not strong enough, when I'm not smart enough, when I'm not brave enough? And Christopher Robin said, you'll do fine if you remember these four things. You're braver than you believe. You're stronger than you seem. You're smarter than you think. And I'll always be with you. Always. Remember those three lessons. You're braver than you believe. You're stronger than you seem. And you're smarter than you think. And I'll always be with you. And in closing, let me give you the best piece of advice I've ever heard anyone give anyone at any time. In the 19th century, there was a brilliant psychologist named William James, probably the greatest psychologist of that generation. And his brother was Henry James, one of the greatest authors in the 19th century. And they were brothers. And William James had a son named Willie. And Willie adored his author uncle. He adored his uncle Henry. And when Willie graduated from college, he wrote a letter to Henry James, one of the greatest authors in the 19th century, and said, I want to be a good person. I want to be a person who's respected. I want to be a person who's loved and revered. How do I do that? Please give me 3 suggestions of things I can do to be the kind of person that I want to be. And he expected a long letter back. And his Uncle Henry sent him, one of the greatest authors of the century, wrote him a 6-word note. His key for success. Be kind, and be kind. God bless you. Thank you very much.